This video is brought to you by Masterworks. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they are providing to the entire upper echelon community. Alright, today is a bit different than normal, though I can promise that some of the more traditional content is currently in the pipeline and will likely be out soon. Rather than examining a real-world situation, as I normally do, I'd like to examine a world-famous television program called The Xfiles, and discuss how, if one wanted to at least, they could see, when looking at it, a fascinating web of clairvoyant predictions, such as the COVID pandemic, national riots, or even September 11th. Before diving in, one very small disclaimer, because people have given me feedback that the disclaimers have gotten too long. I am not weighing in today on a political level. I'm merely showing a series of similarities for entertainment purposes only, and automated copyright on YouTube is a terrible pain in the ass at times, so I'll be using a mix of still images and script quotes instead of the show itself. I wish I could just play the scenes as they happen, but I can't. As a substitute, here's a full transcript for Season 10, Episode 1 called My Struggle, among others. Let's officially begin. Step 1. Context. The Xfiles is an American science fiction drama program that ran from 1993 to 2018. During that time, there were 11 seasons, as well as one mini-season, or spin-off season, called The Lone Gunman. We'll talk about that in a minute. The X-Files gained popularity for its heavy usage of paranormal themes, but layered into a number of key episodes are fascinating similarities to modern-day life, well in advance of anything the show writers could have possibly known. Once again, without weighing in on specific political issues, let's take a look at Season 10, Episode 1, called My Struggle. Quote, "Your own government lies as a matter of course, as a matter of policy. The Tuskegee experiments on black men in the 30s. Henrietta Lacks. What are they trying to do? That's the missing piece." As a side note, these referenced events right here are entirely real. First, the Tuskegee experiments were a horrific crime perpetrated by the USPHS, the United States Public Health Service, where 600 American black men were non-consentingly studied for the effects of untreated syphilis. That is terrible, but Henrietta Lacks, for example, is a much brighter story where the singularly unique and multiplying cancer cells of a young pregnant woman became the basis for medical research decades into the future. HeLa cells, as they are called, have saved countless lives and also played a crucial role in the development of both a polio and a COVID-19 vaccination. Keep that in mind. Time for today's video sponsor, which is, once again, Masterworks. Let's just focus on the facts for this. The S&P 500 just ended its worst year since the 2008 crisis. Actually, Bank of America is now warning that it could flatline this current year, but that's forward-looking. Markets now incentivize a much more active approach, which is where Masterworks comes into play. Featured in publications like Business Insider or the Financial Times, Masterworks was recently declared one of LinkedIn's top 50 startups. Why? Because Masterworks, out of their Manhattan office, is redefining the process of art investment. Skepticism is normal, I understand, and I embrace it, as every one of you knows who regularly watches the channel, but Masterworks does not do anything with NFTs or crypto. None whatsoever. Users are investing in real physical paintings, qualified with the SEC, which I've linked in the description. You can also check on your Masterworks profile at any time, and third-party appraisers provide quarterly appreciation estimates. To date, Masterworks has filed over 200 paintings with the SEC, ranging from $500,000 to $25 million. An important metric I feel is worth highlighting here, Masterworks paid out over $25 million in the last 12 months alone. That includes 3 separate sales just in the last 60 days, which returned 10, 13, and 35% net to their investors. Paintings have sometimes sold out in less than an hour, but using the upper echelon link down below, your account will be preloaded with priority access. To be clear, I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, merely a factual description of Masterworks' recent performance, as well as current market dynamics. Again, link down below in the description. Continuing on, quote, "But it's not hard to imagine, a government hoarding alien technology for 70 years at the expense of human life and the future of the planet, driven not only by corporate greed, but a darker objective, the takeover of America, and then the world itself by any means necessary, however violent or cruel or efficient. By severe drought brought on by weather wars conducted secretly using aerial contaminants and high-altitude electromagnetic waves, in a state of perpetual war to create a problem-reaction solution scenario to distract, enrage, and enslave American citizens at home with tools like the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, which abridged the Constitution in the name of national security." End quote. That's a really long quote, I know, but it's important because looking past whatever portions we subjectively deem to be more or less absurd, everyone will differ on that front, there is truth here. Perpetual war accurately describes the state that America has existed in for decades now. Many dispute that the war in Afghanistan was originally even legal, as America entered a 20-year conflict. The war in Iraq was propped up by false reports, media reports at least, of WMDs, later determined to be inaccurate, but still resulted in conflict from 2003 to 2011. Our sitting presidents for the last 20 or more years have all engaged in global warfare through back-channel methods or technicalities, avoiding the official pathway set forth by Congress, meaning that if we disregard smaller details that are, in my opinion, purely an artifact of the program's genre, these quotes are not so much science fiction, but rather dangerously close to the truth. Still, continuing on, there's even more. Quote, "The militarization of police forces in cities across the US, the building of prison camps by the Federal Emergency Management Agency with no stated purpose, the corporate takeover of food and agriculture, pharmaceuticals and healthcare, even the military in clandestine agendas to fatten, dull, sicken, and control a populace already consumed by consumerism, and I encourage you all to go shopping more." End quote. This is where things get tricky. It's easy to write these words off as raw conspiracy, but let's examine the facts. Militarization of police is largely considered to be the spark that led to a movement called BLM, Black Lives Matter, in 2020 and 2021, or at least that's when it hit its mainstream publicity cycle or notoriety. Officially outlined on their national organization's webpage, demilitarizing police is a primary objective, and yet years prior, in season 10 of the X-Files, the topic was front and center as a root cause of instability in America. What's more, a profit-driven corporate takeover of the food, agriculture, pharmaceutical, and healthcare industries might not be as crazy as it sounds. Clandestine agendas to dull, sicken, and control a populace may seem hard to stomach here on a surface level, breaching the barrier of reasonable skepticism, but what if I added a couple more points? What if obesity in America, as per official statistics from the CDC, resulted in roughly $173 billion of annual healthcare cost? What if the American government simultaneously subsidized junk food, high fructose corn syrup, and vegetable shortening, which are deeply correlated, highly, to rapidly rising obesity rates? What if at the very same time, the American government subsidized the healthcare industry with over $920 billion as per 2021 figures from the Congressional Budget Office, and what if those projections were set to increase over the next 7 years to upwards of $1.4 trillion? That simple statement, clandestine agendas to dull, sicken, and control a populace, contains so much more behind it, and yet the show still manages to accurately describe the world we exist in. Less rooted in concrete fact, the building of prison camps by the Federal Emergency Management Agency with no stated purpose likely refers to a debunked conspiracy theory that utilized footage as far back as 1995, but by and large, I would regard that as a detail that was thrown in for dramatic effect, maybe, and falls short with regards to actual legitimacy. Still, one more paragraph to get through. Quote, "A government that taps your phone, collects your data, and monitors your whereabouts with impunity. A government preparing to use that data against you when it strikes and the final takeover begins. The takeover of America by a well-oiled and well-armed multinational group of elites that will cull, kill, and subjugate. Happening as we sit here. It's happening all around us. The other shoe waiting to drop." End quote. This is where most people get lost. No way, not true, they will say, but the part about tapping your phone, that is true. Going back to the show's prior mention of the Patriot Act, we can see that American citizens are being surveilled in a multitude of separate ways, driven by a growing priority placed on safety as opposed to privacy. Now for the tricky part, but bear with me. In August of 2022, a man named Alexei Pertsev was arrested. The reason? Alexei had developed, rather coded, he wasn't even an official founder of the project, a service called Tornado Cash, which allows for anonymous crypto transactions. Basically, it's called a mixer, where a bunch of money goes in, gets mixed around, and comes out. It's a dream for criminals, but that's beside the point. Independent from him, unless proven that he colluded, but I haven't seen a single shred of evidence to that so far, and I did look rather extensively. Independent from him, a large number of criminals had in fact used the service for illegal activities. But rather than shutting down the criminals, or even the service itself if possible, the government decided to punish the architect of what should otherwise be a perfectly innocent piece of code. Just 2 days after the OFAC officially sanctioned Tornado Cash publicly, which is an American organization or group, Alexei Pertsev was arrested in the Netherlands, still awaiting release. His crime, as we understand it today, simply writing code for a tool that someone else used of their own volition improperly. Akin to punishing someone who creates an anonymous email platform, for example, for private correspondence between individuals, where those individuals sent, let's say, death threats or malicious programs through that email service, right? The user base caused the problems, not the person who coded the service. It is, of course, an imperfect example that might still change with developing information, but surveilling citizens, imprisoning them without rights, or otherwise circumventing the Constitution at every possible turn absolutely is an American reality, and there are probably a lot more cases that I'm just unfamiliar with, which I could highlight in the video had I found them. We sleep through it, this reality, each and every day. To me, it's all fascinating, but there's much more to understand before the picture is actually complete. That particular episode is called My Struggle, but it's actually just part 1 in a multi-episode chain. My Struggle Part 2 is where we get another barrage of connections, but for these I'll focus more on the overarching message rather than individual examples. My Struggle Part 2, Season 10, Episode 6 to be precise, contains a lot of references, but none more important than the extensive parallels to COVID-19. Early in the episode, there are mentions of lockdowns, an obvious parallel given the fact that much of the United States, and the international world for that matter, were locked down for extensive periods of time, despite very small initial expectations. Later in the episode, there are references to the advent of a global contagion, and remember, there was a specific mention prior of Henrietta Lacks in a different episode, whose unique cell structure was, quote, instrumental in the process of developing a COVID-19 vaccine, end quote. There are further references to hospitals being overrun, which may spur controversy to say, but was a contentious narrative, pushed heavily throughout the COVID pandemic as well. There are visuals of masked rioters smashing windows, and even more connections to make, but one of the core principles here was that patient DNA during this outbreak, so to speak, was allegedly being changed. Once again, I make no statements of fact on this, nor do I wish to weigh in at all on one side or the other. But vaccines changing patient DNA is now a very substantial theory being pushed in certain circles online. Depopulation, global elite organizations, all of it is currently the subject of a national debate, with growing support that some form of truth is likely hidden deep down beneath, and a large contingent of supporters who fully believe that the government is willing to engage in this type of agenda. Still, not quite finished. Now for the cherry on top. The same writer responsible for the X-Files comic series, specifically Season 10 and the episodes I mentioned, is Joe Harris, who also wrote a short and somewhat related series called The Lone Gunman. That series, among other things, during its pilot episode on March 4th, 2001, just 6 months before the events of September 11th on that fateful day, depicted a plot where rogue agents of the US government hijacked a plane and flew it into the World Trade Center. To this day, whether you believe them or not, theories have persisted that 9/11 was actually an inside job, or a false flag operation, perpetrated by the US government, which means that this writer has not only predicted core aspects of American division 6 months before they happened in 2001, but also the divisive aspects of COVID-19, the global pandemic, BLM and rising instability on a cultural level, militarization of police, and civil unrest as a result of pandemic policy. What does it mean? I have no idea. Is it a coincidence? Maybe? With all the mentions, I don't know. It's definitely a coincidence if it is one, a heavy one. But for today, I want to examine a topic I find to be extremely interesting and also thought-provoking, and hopefully do so in a way that does not cause division, but merely seeks to just discuss it in a fun setting, I guess. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below, primarily locals and Patreon for a monthly subscription, a YouTube alternative, merchandise, social media, etc., and a partnership I'm going to be announcing soon with short-form video content on a different platform. Just some things in the works, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Of course, the video sponsor as well, check them out. Big thank you to them for making it possible to do what I do. Yeah, have a nice night.